Again, I'm Leonardo McClarty and president of the Howard County Chamber, and like to welcome each of you to what we have coined Regs and Eggs, which is our annual legislative preview event. Typically, it's always been a breakfast that has been at one of our hotels, and obviously we've been in person, but certainly this year we've all continued to adapt to new traditions and are here virtually. But I think the content and discussion will still be as robust as ever. And so certainly we are pleased to have with us, on our panel discussion today, and Delegate Trent Kittleman. We're expecting also, we've got here Senator Guy Gazon. We'll have Ashley Duffman from the Maryland Chamber, as well as also Christopher Costello, who is with Public Sector Consulting and does legislative affairs and lobbying work for the Howard County Chamber, and our moderator, Kimberly Prescott with Prescott HR. So again, we've got a great discussion. We've got some other elected officials on with us, and we'll recognize them in just a moment when we hear from Emmanuel Moore, who was with BGE. But just a couple of things first. Want to also recognize our two legislative affairs co-chairs, and Cheryl Brown and Andrew Robinson, as well as the Chamber's board chair this year, and Chuck Phillips, and other members of the board that are represented here as well. One of the things that we also do that is a part of this event as well is introduce our issues for legislative action or our legislative brief. And so we since have that on our website, and I'm going to actually share screen for just a moment, just to share with you some of those elements. And so you can also see, where it's located, and we'll also have it in our upcoming newsletter that will go out on Friday in the loop, as well as also that will go to the members only on Monday. But our 2020 issues for legislative action, and I'm going to blow this up just a little bit, just so that everyone can see it okay. But much like the conversation this morning, we're going to really be paying particularly close attention to three important issues that we imagine will probably permeate through a lot of the discussions in various committees and so forth this year. And that is that of liability protection for businesses, unemployment insurance, and economic sustainability. Certainly, all of these things have impacted our employer community this year, and really whether you're a nonprofit institution or small business, corporate, middle market, or what have you, there's obvious concerns around all of these issues as we continue through the upcoming General Assembly session, as we look forward to that. Our issues brief is always ultimately covers about 4 areas. I think this year, actually, I'm sorry, 5. This year we've added a 6th, specifically as we look at COVID-19 specific legislation. And so that will be another area in which, again, we will be continuing to stay involved in monitoring, as well as we move into labor and employment. Labor and employment concerns have been big over the last, probably since I've been here now, 6 years. There's always been each year 1 or 2 bills that come up at least in the labor and employment section, and certainly we don't anticipate any differences this year. And so some of the things we'll be continuing to monitor there continue to center around whether it's predictive scheduling, peace order legislation, second chance employment, paid family medical leave insurance, amongst others. Next is our business regulations and operations. And certainly this is where we look at those things that may just, again, impact businesses from the day-to-day operations of their particular businesses and so forth. And so here, again, seeming like it comes back every year, and that is related to small businesses and pass-throughs, corporate income tax discussion, as well as filing fees, combined reporting, is also looking at technology as well. The other thing you'll note that this legislative document covers state as well as local concerns. And so you'll also note the local priorities that's there as well. And then quickly moving into education and workforce development. So again, this is always big for anything in Howard County. It is certainly, I think, as attested by our library system, school system, community college, education is valued in Howard County. And so it's certainly something that we're always are involved in and continuing to monitor. And so certainly on our workforce development side, we'll be taking a look at things related to apprenticeships and also continue to look at how our institutions of higher learning are funded, as well as just overall education as well. And then I think two more areas, environmental and land use. Certainly this area is probably, in some respects, we're probably less involved here on the state level and more engaged here on the local level. And this will pertain to everything from whether it's Ellicott City flood mitigation, affordable housing, also looking at village center redevelopment, as well as the fact that this year we're starting the process of updating our general plan. So certainly that is going to generate a lot of widespread interest as well. Transportation, which certainly is a big component. Typically, transportation is included in our land use subcommittee, but for this legislation during the legislative session, we separate it out just because it's such a big area in and of itself on its own. And so with that, that is just the Chamber's issues for legislative action for 2021. Certainly encourage you to go and visit the Chamber's website to take a look at that. Real simple. I'm going to change the tab here, but if you go to our website and go under advocacy, you'll see issues for legislative action. We make sure it's really easy that you don't have to dig around for it. And from there, you can click it, download it, take a look at it, and just know that during the upcoming session, these will be things that we'll be following. And certainly a lot of it will be with the assistance of Ashley and her team, as well as also working with Chris as well. And then there are a couple of new things we're asking for the upcoming year to keep you abreast of activities as well. So with that, I'm going to stop talking for a moment, but this event, whether virtual or in person, is always supported by a number of different businesses and companies. And while we have our annual partners who we are extremely pleased to have their support collectively throughout the entire year, and you see them on the virtual background behind me, this event, I think for at least the last 4 or 5 years, has been supported by BGE. And so we're going to hear now from Emmanuel Moore, who was External Affairs Manager with BGE, who's going to bring some sponsor remarks, as well as recognize our other elected officials who are present with us. So Emmanuel, the screen is yours.
I appreciate that, Leonardo. Thank you. So the Senators Gazoni and Freihester and Delegates Ebersol, Delegate Flermart, Hill, and Kittleman, to President CEO McClarty, Howard County Chamber members, board, and invited guests, good morning. If you're part of the delegation and I neglected to mention your name, apologize for that. I'm very limited in what I can see on my screen and what I can keep in my memory these days. But we thank you for your leadership and your presence. I want to thank the Howard County Chamber for the invitation to share remarks and to partner with this event and with the organization. We recognize that the Howard County Chamber is a very important and vital institution that represents and connects the business community to key local issues and opportunities. As Leonardo mentioned, my name is Emmanuel Moore. I'm the manager for external affairs for BGE. And on behalf of my CEO, Kareem Kuzami, and my senior vice president, Rodney Yadoy, who you might know either one of them, I want to bring you greetings on behalf of the company. As a sponsor of Regs and Eggs, BG is committed to standing with the Chamber and its mission to provide advocacy, connections, and access to timely information to advance the growth and success of the business community. And this is not merely an opportunity to expand profits, but rather it's a broader lens that the Chamber wields to ensure the economy, families, and the vibrancy of Howard County is at the forefront of its actions. And that is something that BGE can always get behind. At BGE, we recognize that no one person, no one organization can really drive change that's sustainable and for the long term. and really impact the greater good of the area. Instead, it takes an interconnection of organizations and thoughts and people and industries and nonprofits and government to bring about the best of ideas and fortify the changes that we all need to have our communities thriving. And that is a skill set that the chamber has long mastered and implemented in its operation. And it's something that our 3,200 BGE employees also implement on a day-to-day basis to get the safe and reliable energy delivered to our customers. And so similar to today's gatherings, we've had to put a lot of energy into learning how to adapt to these new norms. It's been a year of learning. I've had the privilege of leading my team to find new ways to innovate, to ensure that we are upholding safety, that we are leading sustainability, and that we're providing a decent and an important service to our customers. And we recognize we hold this vital role that helps to keep the communities that we serve intact, much like the Howard County Chamber. So as we kick off today's event, I'm inviting everyone to fully take part, to listen attentively and participate in questions, things of that sort. And then I ask that you join BGE and helping us continue to support this impressive chamber. And with that, I'll say thank you.
Thank you, Emmanuel, and thank you again for your continued support. And BGE has been a great partner of the chamber. So here's what the plans are as it relates to our agenda and so forth this morning. So we're going to actually take the next 15 minutes or so, and we're going to actually have a little bit of networking. One of the things that we know that has been missing in the midst of our Zoom fixation and our and all of the utilization of Teams and WebEx is just the ability to just be able to talk to people and meet some folks that we haven't met or become reacquainted with people we haven't seen. So Taylor Tarleton is going to be breaking us up in the next couple of minutes or seconds rather, and we're going to go into some breakout rooms. And while you're there, going to certainly ask that outside of introducing yourself to the other folks in your room and your company, to have a little bit of discussion, if you would think about what is a legislative issue or issues that you're interested in or following over this next session. And we'll have a little discussion in our individual rooms for about 15 minutes. Then we'll come back roughly about 9:30 and we'll introduce our moderator and our panelists. And then we'll, from there, have our discussion. And then, we will wrap up roughly about 10:25 or so, so that we'll be done by 10:30. And so if that sounds good, the other thing I want to also mention as well, when we get ready, when we come back for the discussion, obviously our moderator has prepared questions for our panelists, but we really want this to be engaging. And so rather than us just wait till we've exhausted our questions, if there's a question that you have, certainly if you'll put it in the chat room, we'll be monitoring that. And we're going to also try to take some questions throughout the duration of the discussion, just so that we have more engagement and more involvement as opposed to just you all just watching a screen for the next hour or so. But we really want this to have some engagement. And so Taylor, if we're ready, you can feel free to start breaking us up into our respective rooms.
Sounds good. So I'm going to be breaking up everyone. If you don't immediately get assigned to a room, don't panic. I'm just putting everybody around that may have used different rooms. So just bear with me for a couple minutes.
Well, welcome back. Hopefully, everyone had some good opportunities to talk with some folks maybe you haven't seen in a while, or maybe to even engage with some of our elected officials in a much smaller group setting than this forum here. But again, we're going to now move into the actual program in and of itself. And so I know she was recognized earlier by Emmanuel, and I think she's been able to join us now, but certainly want to just recognize Senator Hester, who I think has been able to officially make it in. We had some, I guess we had her in a waiting cell for a moment, as we were trying to get people in from the waiting room and so forth. But with that, we'll get ready to move into the actual discussion part of the agenda. And for those of you that may have come on just a little bit late after I made opening comments, essentially we're going to have this as a panel discussion, but then if you have questions, certainly feel free to enter them into the chat room, and we're going to recognize them quick sooner rather than later, as we really want this to be an engaging process. And so with that, I'm going to actually go on and just recognize and introduce our panelists here. First, we have Senator Guy Gazon, and many of you know Guy, who has certainly been extremely active and involved in the Howard County community for a number of years now. I won't say how long, going back to his days on county council, obviously on the House side, and now senator, and being fortunate to have ascended into great senior leadership in the Senate, in the General Assembly. And so with that, we have Senator Guy Gazon. Next, we have Delegate Trent Kittleman. And again, Trent is another one that has been a great friend of the chamber, always willing to participate whenever we've asked and when we've called, actively involved in the county, and particularly in her district, which is out towards generally the western part of the county, but again, very active, certainly involved in a host of issues around transportation, amongst other things. And so with that, Delegate Trent Kittleman. And then kind of to give, I guess, as we might call that, maybe business perspective, if you will, we have Ashley Duffman, who was the Vice President of Legislative Affairs for the Maryland Chamber. And Ashley and I have really been able to become acquainted and work closely together these last couple of years. I think Ashley has just been at the Maryland Chamber now roughly about maybe a year to 18 months, but it seems like much longer. And she's been able to bring her previous legislative experience from working on Capitol Hill here to the state level, and it's been a great asset to the Maryland Chamber. And so Ashley Duffman. And then certainly last but not least, Christopher Costello, who, I guess if there was a Yoda, so to speak, of as we start talking about public policy or what have you, that might be Chris, as he just, has just a long tenure and history in working in public policy here in Maryland, and can really give you stories among stories about kind of how things have happened, how they transpired, and it's been just a great asset to me here at the Chamber. And Christopher, his company is Public Sector Consulting, and he provides legislative affairs lobbying work for a host of associations and businesses in Annapolis. And so Chris Costello. And then to moderate and bring this all together, we have Kimberly Prescott. And Kimberly is the president of Prescott HR Services, which is a human resource consulting firm that helps clients with everything from compliance issues to recruiting to onboarding and staffing, and even serving as like your external HR company. And so Kimberly is going to moderate this morning. And so with that, I'm going to now turn things over to Kimberly Prescott.
Thank you, Leonardo. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, panelists. Before we get into any of the actual legislative issues that we've outlined as our priorities, the first thing I want to do is to ask our legislators if they could please share with us their priorities for this legislative session, and if they could let us know the difference between state and local for their priorities. And if we could start with Senator Gazon.
Hi, everybody. Balance the budget is my priority. I obviously am the chair of the budget committee. Have spent really endless hours on chats and calls and Zooms all through the interim so far, trying to get a handle on exactly where we are. And quite frankly, it's so fluid. It's become uh, very hard to really predict exactly where we're going to end up by the time we start session. The good news is that things have clearly gotten better from our budget standpoint, largely because of impacts from the stimulus program. Uh, but there's still a lot of sort of shaky ground ahead. So, I mean, everything I do is focused on the budget, and I mean that's it. It's the top priority.
Thank you. And Delegate Kittleman, what are your priorities for this session?
Well, that's kind of hard to say because as Guy said, everything is so fluid. And it will depend on exactly how we are going to conduct the coming session, which I don't think anyone has figured out yet. We need to have involvement. We need to have the public have access to what we do. And one theory is that we simply do the one thing that we are mandated to do, which is to pass a balanced budget. And then perhaps later in the year, we could come back and do bills if there is the opportunity to actually, as I like to say, return to normal. I agree completely with Senator Gazon that the key is going to be money, and it's everywhere. And I don't think we've really understood and felt the impact that it's going to make. And we have a number of bills sort of on the cusp that will possibly come up for a veto override. That Kerwin is an obvious example, and the others that the governor vetoed. Regardless of how you feel about those bills, the ability to afford them is going to be very, very limited. And I would hate to see us get involved in trying to do more than we can and ending up not doing anything well.
Okay, thank you. And from a business perspective, Chris and Ashley, would you share what you perceive to be hot button issues that we need to consider, and even ones that might not be priorities that we need to watch in this session? And we can start with Ashley.
Thank you. Well, first, thank you to you, Kimberly, and also the Howard County Chamber for inviting us to participate today. It's a great event every year, and we're just grateful to be a part of it. Many of the things that are our hot button issues, our top priorities, are going to be really the meat of the rest of our discussion today. The things that businesses need and require to be able to continue through the various phases of economic recovery. So things like liability protection, addressing unemployment insurance premiums, and this broader category of economic sustainability and what that means for businesses from a financial and operational perspective. To the chairman's point, certainly we're in a far better place now economically than we were 7 or 8 months ago. If you look across, though, all the key economic indicators, we're very much still in an uncertain and a fragile place as it relates to our economic recovery. And, you know, with no real action coming out of Congress and no indication that that's going to happen in the near future, the policies that we implement and think through during our next legislative session are really going to be key and critical for how quickly and strongly our business community is able to recover from the pandemic. So I just really look forward to continuing through the rest of those topics. Like I said, the 3 that Leonardo has identified already for you as their top priorities are ours as well. And so look forward to digging into them a little bit more and talking through some of the details.
Thank you. And Chris, what do you see as some of the hot topics that we need to consider in this next session?
Well, I think that Ashley, kind of summarized them very well. I think that unemployment insurance is going to be, it has not really been talked a lot about in detail, but I looked at the unemployment insurance trust fund balance as of, I think it was September 30th. And I think we have about $217 million in the fund, which is amazing that we have any money left. But that balance, divided by the total taxable payroll for the 12 prior months means that employers will probably go to the table F, which means that they'll be paying about come January 1, they probably will be paying the highest tax rate based on their experience. And I know Ashley and the chamber are going to probably lead an effort to try and mitigate that increase, which is going to be depending upon what happens in the department, could be a very, very difficult thing to do. It certainly will be an amazing help to the business community if they can keep those those rates from going up to where they might otherwise go. And the liability, I think Senator Hester actually has put a bill in that is similar to what went into Tennessee and passed in Tennessee, and apparently has done very well there. No one has appealed it. That is helping employers to cope with or avoid any problems with liability. Chamber can do those two things, and the Howard County business community can get behind and support what is being done there. I think that we could have a very, very good session next year for the business community. Just those two issues, and there are many others too.
Yes, thank you. And we're definitely going to have a deeper conversation about unemployment insurance shortly. So I know that we've outlined the 3 topics that are of particular interest. And of course, there are others that will need to be addressed. But the first, and it came up in our breakout session, is liability protection. So we'll just go ahead and get into that topic now. Ashley, we've heard a lot about businesses seeking liability protection from COVID-19 related lawsuits, so much so that these issues are impacting other stimulus relief packages in Washington. Why is liability protection such a major topic of concern for employers?
Sure. Thanks for the question, Kimberly. So I'll start with kind of an aggregate statement, and that is what I kind of already touched on, which is in a situation where many of our businesses are continuing to struggle financially, operationally. Some are starting to come back online, and really we're in this sort of fragile place. Everything we think about in terms of priorities is in an effort to achieve predictability, stability, and assurances for employers that they're not going to continue to face financial hardships unnecessarily. So as it relates to the topic of liability protection, as businesses across the spectrum, all sizes, all industry segments, and other organizations like educational institutions, nonprofits, schools, healthcare providers, et cetera, as they have come back online and resumed commerce, they're working as hard as they can to protect themselves, their employees, customers, the general public across the board. And it should go without saying, but I always say it just as a backdrop: public health, safety, top priority, far and away. No one can test that. And so our members are doing the things that are required, putting the protocols and processes as recommended by the CDC and our public health experts in place to protect everyone. That's the front of mind always. But there has become over time the growing risk of opportunistic lawsuits, frivolous lawsuits being filed against organizations, and they pose a really significant barrier to our ability to continue in a meaningful way to reignite the economy. So back in June, the US Chamber of Commerce did a study that really asked business owners, and when they say small business owners, they're talking about size 20 to 500 employees. What is your greatest concern? What are your biggest challenges right now? Certainly financial and operational challenges were the top of the list, but in a close third, with 2/3 of them reporting that liability threats and the threat of frivolous lawsuits was a top fear. And so over time, we've really tried to look to what solutions are out there to try to grant some protection, some assurance for businesses that they're not going to be exposed to frivolous lawsuits if they follow the guidance and recommendations of public health officials. It was a couple of months ago looking like Congress was going to act and move in that direction, with the Senate incorporating some liability protection in their proposal. That is increasingly looking unlikely. And so we've turned our attention now to working with our state policymakers to figure out what action can be taken to shield business owners from these unwarranted lawsuits. And look, we're not asking for blanket immunity. We're not asking that there be no lawsuit or no claims brought against businesses. Gross negligence, willful misconduct, bad actors, they should all be held accountable. And we're also not asking for this to be a blank check forever. We're really just looking for a temporary safe harbor within the time of the state of emergency, within the time of the pandemic, that protects business owners who have done all they can to meet public health and safety guidelines. And the other problem and challenge that has arisen as part of that is that it's a moving target. It's often being done with inconsistent or incomplete information. Just this morning, the CDC updated its guidelines on contact. So again, with all this uncertainty, all of these moving targets, looking for that protection for businesses. So it's just one less thing that has to be on their plate as they work through the phases of recovery.
Thank you. And Chris, as a lobbyist and someone that monitors the public policy in Maryland and in other states, can you share your thoughts on what other states have been able to do from a liability protection perspective and what you hope Maryland will be able to consider in the next session?
Well, the first state that I know of that did anything was Tennessee. And I did get a copy of their law, and it, it's a rather simple but effective law, and it's working in Tennessee. I think we're looking at it here in Maryland. I know that it addresses the very thing that Ashley's talking about, and that is, it simply says that unless you've done something in the line of gross negligence, you're pretty much not going to be able to sue somebody for COVID-related negligence. I guess you'd have to take a look at the way that bill is drawn and apply it to Maryland. But I followed up with Tennessee, and they said that it's working down there. There's been no appeals. Nobody down there in Tennessee has tried to take it to court. So I think maybe it's worth looking at. Now, whether that can be done here in Maryland, I don't know. But in Tennessee, they had the county governments, the state governments, obviously the nonprofit organizations. They all got together and supported this bill. It was a bipartisan bill. I guess the governor actually held a special session to do it. Now, whether it's going to run into a lot of flack here in Maryland, I don't know. But everybody has a stake in seeing this liability protection, which is not putting everybody at risk. The individuals at risk, but is kind of dampening down and putting some reason into the process where we don't have everybody running to lawsuits, as Ashley is saying. That just makes it impossible for businesses, and including state government and hospitals and nonprofit groups that are trying to provide some help to everybody, from having to increase their premiums and their cost of litigation. This would be something like this has to be done, or we end up creating so many problems. I think we should take a look at Tennessee, and I don't know if other states have done it, but I suspect that they have.
Yeah, Kimberly, if I could just hop in, we know that 14 states have passed a bill of some kind, with an additional 7 that have it in the hopper that are considering it currently. And Alabama was able to put in some liability protection through executive order. So we're looking at roughly half the states that have either moved in this direction or considering moving in this direction. And there's, of course, a spectrum of what those bills look like and how widely they protect and what that looks like. But without federal government action, there is a real movement afoot among the states to try to address this and make it one less problem for businesses as they move through recovery.
Well, I hope we can get all of that together, and we'll be very supportive of what the chamber is doing, and I would hope we could get it done this session.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for both of your perspectives. Senator Gazon and Delegate Kittleman, based on what we've heard from Ashley and Chris, what are your thoughts on potential legislation or the need for liability protection conversations in Maryland?
You want Senator Gazon? Do you want to go first?
Sure. I actually thought I thought Ashley really just completely nailed it, laid it all out. It was very clear. Um, you know, there are bad actors out there in every place of society, and we can't allow that to happen. But people who abide by the rules shouldn't be punished for abiding by the rules. That's just a philosophy. This isn't something that comes in my committee, quite frankly, but that doesn't mean I'm not interested in it. I think there are. I think it's critical that we address this year.
Um, there are 3 points that I'd like to make. The first of which is I kind of wish this breakfast were 2 weeks hence, because within 13 days we are going to have an election, and the results are going to be dramatic because the 2 sides are so different in their approach. And those bills that were in Congress to do exactly what we're looking at, very possibly and very probably, I would think, will come back regardless of who wins, whether or not they can ever pass anything. Again, it all depends on the election. So a lot of our conversation is sort of wait and see. I agree with everything that I have thought we need tort reform regardless of the pandemic. And I think that businesses have had a very difficult time, particularly small businesses that were required to be closed for so long. I'm just glad we're not New York City. That's just unconscionable. And the final thing is, when this first started, the governor's orders waived an enormous number of regulations. I've got 3 pages of specific regulations that were waived, including things had to do with childcare regulations. There's a significant number of childcare regulations may be suspended, health order, things that you wouldn't think would be in there are. And I don't know, I think they're all still in place. They will help, I believe, to mitigate lawsuits. And the other piece of that is we really should look at that to see if those are some things that we could make permanent. If we got along without them and there were no repercussions, that might be one way to streamline some of the regulations that would always help business.
Thank you. And I'd also like to ask, Senator Hester would like to give some feedback. So Senator Hester.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. Well, I've been working on this, and I'd like to thank many of those on the panel today, including the Howard County Chamber, Senator Gazon and Ashley, for all the time that they put in, on the Bipartisan Small Business Caucus. We've been in existence for about 1.5 years, and what I like about this bipartisan caucus is that, we as policymakers, we need to be focused on bringing solutions to the table to assist small businesses and business in general, both in the short term, given this pandemic, but also in terms of a multi-year recovery. And I have to say that I respectfully disagree with my delegate from District 9A. I think with 14 states taking action at the state level on liability insurance, the time really is now to put something forward that both sides can agree with. And Tennessee is one of the several different states that we're looking at. And given this will go through JPR, I'm working closely with the chairman of JPR on some kind of liability protection. In addition to Tennessee, Nevada, Utah, California, Georgia, Louisiana, Mississippi, New York, they've all passed legislation. So once again, we're looking to strike that moderate balance that is the hallmark of good legislation to put forward. And if anybody has specific comments on any of those states' legislation, things they like, things they don't like, please feel free to send my office an email. I previously put my email address in the chat box. I also just wanted to give a quick shout out. We did our first small business policy hackathon yesterday, and that you can watch that on YouTube, but we had 8 presentations from people across the states giving us their best kind of policy on a shoestring budget solutions for helping small business. Thank you so much, Kimberly.
Yes, thank you, Senator Hester. And thank you all for your feedback on this topic. So we're going to move to our next topic, which is unemployment insurance. And we know that there's a need to replenish the funds to the unemployment insurance fund. And that has, because of the result of the amount of claims that we received from COVID-19. But how can we do this without increasing costs to employers? And how do we do that by not increasing impacting the experience ratings of the employers? And keeping in mind that I know that balancing the budget is extremely important, how do we propose that we would be able to do this without significant impact to employers? We'll start with Senator Gazon.
Okay, well, try to follow the bouncing ball here because it's really complicated, as I think you probably all realize, and very challenging, I know, and concerning for employers out there. So when the pandemic started, we had about $1.3 billion in the fund. Actually, Chris, as of yesterday, we're down to 175 million. At the end of September was the place where the calculations occur for the next year. And of course, as you mentioned, coming in to January, and then payments ultimately due in April, on April 30th. In all likelihood, we're going to go from A on the charge to F. And the reason I laid out that time frame is that we do have a little time to work through this, and that's what I think we need to be doing. The state actually has the ability to control the charts, but that's kind of misleading in a sense, because the federal government can issue penalties if we don't have a sustainable plan to pay for everything that we need to pay for. So we're already beginning the process and in the process of taking a $300 million loan from the federal government, of which we will have to pay interest on. So we've got this loan coming, which is really a temporary fix, and obviously a good thing, but we're ultimately going to have to pay that back. It will be flexible over time, but we're going to have to do that. At the end of the day, though, where we're sitting is with $1 billion problem in the fund, and that's the real challenge. We can manipulate the chart. We can't manipulate it to a point to get rid of that $1 billion problem. It's just not possible. And certainly the federal government will come down on us if we did. So how are we going to come up with that money to backfill in that? And the answer is, I don't have an answer right now, but I know it's a big priority. It's actually, from my perspective, personally, because it's a budgetary issue, it is probably the single biggest small business issue that we face as we move into the session. And it's the one that I've been pretty acutely aware of. There are not a lot of pockets of extra money out there. And, we can talk about that maybe in the next part too. But the reality is, unlike the federal government, we just don't have the ability to generate more funds and mostly raise taxes. And quite frankly, for those of you who are concerned about all of that, I don't think there's a very, at least on our side, an incredibly strong desire right now to leap into that. We really want to think about the budget and think about where we are very slowly, and make sure before we take any steps that we've considered everything and where we are. And a large part of that deals with whether or not we get more federal stimulus. Bottom line, I guess, is in what is a complicated problem, we're going to do our very best. It is, again, like I said, my top priority from a business standpoint.
You. And then Delegate Kittleman.
Thank you. First, I would like to assure Senator Gazon that as far as raising taxes go, our side is right where his side is. We don't do that. And I think the governor has made that very clear. And the other thing that I would like to say about what Senator Gazon said is he's absolutely right. We have a tendency in this country and in the state to look at a problem and say, how are we going to fix it? When some of these problems simply cannot be fixed. And I think that we've got to bite the bullet and make the hard choices and not pretend to our constituents that, excuse me, that everything is fixable. And under these circumstances, they simply aren't. I'm sure that my fellow delegates and senators had the same experience that we did during the whole awful beginning of the unemployment insurance efforts. Our administration apparently had a new system that they were required to do. And I cannot tell you how many calls and emails we got with people who were literally looking for money to be able to go buy food, and they couldn't get through to the unemployment office. A very, very frustrating and unhappy experience. And I believe we're doing a little bit better on that, but the money is the bottom line. Again, I do think that once the election is over and we know where we stand with who is running things, then the Congress will be willing to pass something to give people the help that they need.
Thank you. And Ashley and Chris, do you have anything that you'd like to add to this topic?
Sure. Well, the first thing I would say is that to the chairman's point about our $1 billion problem, I think there's really acknowledgement from our side that there is this tremendous delta. The first thing, of course, is that we want to make sure that the fund's healthy, and our Department of Labor, the U.S. Department of Labor, is going to do whatever is required to make sure that there is money in that fund for individual claimants, the unemployed who continue to need it. That's top priority. But then we also need to think about moving forward, what is that increase in premium to be able to backfill the fund, to the chairman's point, going to look like in 2021 for employers who are already struggling. I think that from our perspective within our membership, we're under no illusion that we're going to grow a money tree and find a unicorn that's going to bring in a sack of funds to be able to fix this problem for us. We know that that's not going to happen. But to the extent that we can be creative in finding some unallocated funds, for example, that might be left over from CARES, or that might be unallocated from the general fund. Certainly, they're not going to fix our $1 billion problem, but if we can make incremental progress, perhaps from taking us from table F to table E, or optimistically, because it's still the morning and I haven't had a full day yet to be cynical, taking us from table F to table D, anything that can be done to try to bridge that gap to help employers is going to be great for the business community and something that we support. In that space, as it relates to the fund and how we're going to backfill it, it's not a zero-sum game for us. We're realistic. Right? We know that there's not going to be a money tree. I hope that Congress, to the delegates' point, I hope that Congress is going to come back after the election and figure out a way to get some state and local funding, some of which can be diverted to solve this problem. But again, the cynic in me says we can't rely on that as being the answer. We have to really move forward with other plans. And so we've looked at things like we've asked the BPW to consider using some of those remaining CARES funds that are unallocated to try to backfill the fund. It's a drop in the bucket, but it's a small step to closing that gap. And so we'll continue to do that. We look forward to working with the legislature to find other creative ways, other sort of lingering dollars out there that we might be able to pull from the couch cushions and try to get some support in the fund. The other thing that I wanted to just quickly touch on, which is a different issue, but in this space, is the challenges that we're seeing with experience rating. That is another factor in the calculation of what an employer will have to pay for their 2021 premiums. So there's where we are in the table and how that's calculated, plus an employer's experience rating. And as you all on the phone know, the experience rating is calculated based on, whether or not, this is really generally and being really oversimplifying, but whether or not you've had to lay off employees and how that negatively impacts your experience rating for your calculation moving forward. And we know that over the course of the last few months, our businesses, in particular our small businesses who were disproportionately impacted by having to lay off employees really through no fault of their own. They had to shut their doors to be able to comply with executive orders. As a result, there's foregone revenue. They had to lay off employees. There's nothing that can be done really about that. And as a result, they're starting to see these notices come in about their experience rating and what's being counted against them in terms of having to have laid off those employees. And so what we've been advocating for as a business community is a legislative fix or legislative action to sort of statutorily outline that employers' experience rating would not be negatively impacted during a pandemic. Of course, this would have guardrails. We're not talking about something blanket. You laid off someone on March 1st, and now you're trying to say that, that counted towards the pandemic. We'd have to really iron out the details, make sure there were guardrails, make sure that we, took into account what might be bad actors. But generally speaking, some legislative action to ensure that if you were an employer that laid off an employee as a direct result of the pandemic, that would not count negatively against your experience rating moving forward. Other states have done this. Our closest neighbor that's done it is Delaware. We've looked really closely at their legislation. Seems to be some appetite. We're working with Senator Klossmeyer and Delegate Carey in the House on what that language might look like. And we're really hopeful that that's one space where we can get some bipartisan support. And just, again, any small amount of support that we can get around the edges for our employers goes a long way to help them.
Thank you. Thank you for that context.
Could I just jump in for 1 second? I don't believe I said, and I should, is despite all the issues and the problems we have, the last place I would look to try and recoup any of those funds is from the small businesses, exactly for the reason that they're the ones that have suffered so dramatically. So I would definitely support something that would cure that problem.
Thank you. And Chris, did you have anything you'd like to add to this?
So I totally agree with what Ashley has said. And one thing I should add is, and because this is not the first time that Maryland and the state of Maryland and Maryland employers have seen this exact situation. And I have the unfortunate, perhaps situation where I've been here so long. We were back in the 70s, our fund was deficit. We were facing the maximum rates, and we had to deal with the very same thing. And the thing that we had to recognize is that we will recover, people will go back to work, the fund will come back, and we don't want to have a situation where we try and accept a situation where it will, we would have to create a mindset where we're always going to be at the worst possible situation. As Ashley and the chamber is saying, let's try and figure that we're going to see the fund come back on its own. Because when we start in the first quarter of next year, that's when all the employers will be paying their contributions, and you get the biggest hit increase in contributions. So when those rates go in at the higher rate, you're going to be a big increase in funding. If you put them in the maximum rate, what you're going to do is you're going to discourage employment, and you're going to get a situation where you really don't want to do that. Reducing the table to a lower level will actually help you in your recovery. So you will be actually helping yourself as you start to rebuild the fund. And that's exactly what the General Assembly did many years ago. Instead of having the rate go to the maximum rate, they reduced that so the impact was less, and they actually saw the fund recover the recovery was much better. But it will come back, and I think we should prepare ourselves to think in that way so that we don't overburden the employers and have a situation where we make the recovery of the fund that much more difficult. I think that, we're seeing the recovery now. As we're looking at, businesses starting to rehire, go back to work, reopen, carefully. And with this liability legislation that we're talking about, when that goes into effect, there'd be a lot more confidence employers to reopen and get back into the swing of things. I don't know when, but we should begin to see a lot more confidence in the workplace. That's when you're going to see more employers, more people getting employed, more taxable wages coming into the system, more contributions going into the fund. So it will begin to build the fund. The fund will rebuild very rapidly once that starts to happen. Overburdening employers at a higher rate, contribution rate, will only discourage that, and that's what my concern would be.
Thank you.
Chris, I was just gonna say, Chris is right. I think to be or maintain a level of optimism about that over the course of time. And actually, the last time we were on F on the table was 2010, 11, and 12. So it really was only 8 years ago that we were at those levels, and then we got back to a place where we had $1.3 billion in the pot. So I think that there's that element of hopefulness, but I think you're right. And as I was trying to point out, that we've got to look at every angle, both the within the chart and moving up and down the chart to determine whether or not we can, or where we can help where we can. I want to say, because I think we're probably move into the economic stability thing too, is everything right now with regard to our budget, everything financial is tied to whether or not we get another stimulus package from the feds. It's just the bottom line. And with that, we will have a lot more flexibility to do the things that we really want to do to help the people who need it. And, the stimulus package right now affected all of our tax revenues, because things like the increased unemployment benefit, the PPP, all of which were taxable, ended up improving our withholdings dramatically. And it's those kinds of things that has led us to the place where our budget, our 20 budget, and our 21 budget will probably, 20 already did end in the positive, and 21 may also. But without those programs, without that stimulus, we won't have the additional money we need, and we will be clearly in a place where we're $1 billion to $2.5 billion short. And so that's really the key to everything right now. The federal government can help us because they have the ability to do it. We, as you know, just don't have that ability to generate that kind of money.
Yes, and before we get all the way into the topic of economic sustainability, thank you. That's okay, no problem. I just want to remind our audience that we are welcoming questions. Please put your questions in the chat as we go, because we will be bumping up on the end of our time when we finish this next topic, I'm sure. So please put your questions in the chat box. So great segue into this topic. Our last topic of today is economic sustainability. The state budget has been challenged prior to the coronavirus, and COVID-19 impacted local government, state government, nonprofits, private sector, all of them alike. Senator Gazon and Delegate Kittleman, how do you envision you and your colleagues providing economic assistance to private employers and still meeting political agenda items such as education funding, for example, the current commission? And we'll start with you, Senator Gazon.
Well, I'm going to just quickly, because I just jotted them down while we were talking here, a number of things we've done over the last couple of years. And I hope it's instructive to what I want to keep doing in our committee and in the legislature in different ways. Some of it's targeted, some of it is broad-based. And here are some examples. We've passed the first of its kind in the nation cybersecurity tax credit. We did the first energy storage tax credit, new economy stuff. We provided for sales and use tax exemptions for development of older properties, including in particular Trade Point Atlantic and the old Bethlehem Steel property, which has been dramatic in its return. They were supposed to have 10,000 new jobs at full development. They're half developed and they're already at 8,000 new jobs. We worked on regs there were unfair regulations to improve engineers. I worked on that with Chris. We did a bill on marketplace facilitators and collecting appropriate taxes in the new economy to help the brick and mortar companies. We changed the corporate way of calculating to a single sales factor in order also to help local Maryland businesses. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that we're going to look at every opportunity we possibly can to target things both individually for industries that sometimes we want to support because they're new and they want to get them going, and also broadly speaking. Another thing that was huge that we did last year, and it's kind of a sleeper issue, was for pass-through entities. We changed the way to make calculations so individuals who are in those organizations can actually take advantage of federal tax deductions. These are all things, and actually when you go back and talk to your accountants this year, you're going to be surprised if you have a pass-through entity because it's a significant improvement over what was passed by the federal administration's tax bill. So all these pieces, we're constantly looking for ways to help our local businesses, to help our both big and small, to create jobs and do the things that are necessary. This is obviously a very unique year, and there are specific industries I still think need some more help. Obviously, the restaurant industry has been tough, entertainment industry across the board. So there's a lot of stuff we're going to look at, like we have in the past. You know, I think we'll find ways along the way. Obviously, as been said many, many times, money is going to be the issue, and obviously driven by what happens with what the federal government is willing to do.
Thank you. So yes, please.
Thank you. Yeah, a lot of the things that Senator Gazon said would be of help. But from a larger perspective, there are two things that I want to mention. One is whenever there are financial problems, it is our tendency to look to how to create more revenue. I think in an extraordinary time like this, we really need to focus on how we can lower our spending. And that means looking at the programs. We're constantly passing laws for more big, fancy programs. And it sounds good. If you can afford it, maybe that's a good idea. But I hope our legislature will be willing to look at things like that. And obviously the biggest one of those is Kerwin. There are two major education, one of them isn't a bill, but we do want to continue to spend money to construct schools because we have a very good way of doing that using the revenue from the, having it go through the revenue authority of the stadium revenue authority then, believe it or not, but they are doing a wonderful job building schools in Baltimore. And there was a bill passed to do that same thing on a statewide basis. And I think that's very reasonable. The Kerwin bill, on the other hand, I don't know I don't know if it's going to come up for a veto override, but I think that would probably be a very, very devastating thing to do. And I really hope that we are willing as a legislature to look at what happened during this COVID crisis to education. We were talking about it in our little breakout session. Parents became very, very upset because they have no choice right now and during a lot of this. Some people can do online learning, and that's a good thing. We should probably do more of that, but there are a lot of kids that just is wrong for. And as the CDC has said, that's not a good situation health-wise for children. They have to get back to school. But what has happened is the people who have the money have been able to find other venues for their children. They are able to, if there's room, get them into a private school or other online schools accommodating. we in Maryland have been looking askance at anything other than public education. And I think public education is fine, particularly in Howard and Carroll counties. But the alternative, charter schools, and even our Boost program are opportunities to give parents more control over how their children are exercised. And I don't care whether you live in the most wealthy place in the state or have the least, the poorest people in the state, you care about your kids. And if we give people more choices, not only will that improve the outcome of our education, it will also allow us to not have to spend all of the money that is programmed in the Kerwin Commission for results that are, to a lot of us, very questionable, and looking at that money is the only answer. And I just don't think it is. I think this is an opportunity to really rethink how we offer education to our constituents.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And with just about 8 minutes left, I'll ask Chris and Ashley, what concerns are you hearing from your clients or members when it comes to the business support from the General Assembly? Are there concerns that state funding needs may be met by increasing taxes or placing various fees on employers? And we can start with Ashley.
Sure. Thanks, Kimberly. Well, the first thing I want to do is just follow up on something that the chairman said and say yes to those number of sort of targeted tax relief components that the Senate has moved over the Senate and House, the legislature has moved over the last couple of years. One you didn't mention was the sales and use tax exemption for data centers, which was a huge victory, in particular for Howard County. We know that bill has generated a ton of interest in Howard County, and we're working with the economic development team there to make sure those connections are made. Just the second that bill passed, the phone was ringing off the hook, and Howard County was one of the places that we studied in terms of economic impact, and I really feel strongly that you're going to see a big return from that one. So thank you, Senator, for your leadership on that. We very much appreciate it on that and the PTE bill, which we know is going to be a huge relief for our PTE small business owners. And so again, just want to say thank you for that. Those are huge wins for us and for our members. I think, the one thing to the senator's point that we do know, and the one consistent thing over the last 7 to 8 months, is that everything is a moving target. Every projection, every prediction, everything we're thinking about is a moving target, largely centered on whether or not Congress is going to act. But also there are other things, right? We don't know if there's going to be a second wave that's going to require us to shut down commerce. We don't know when a vaccine may not be coming. We also don't really know what commerce is going to look like truly when we fully can resume. Like what's the transition to greater remote work going to look like? What does that mean for those secondary and tertiary businesses like commercial properties? All this uncertainty sort of lingering out there. What we do know is that our business community is adaptable, flexible, and will rise to the occasion in the face of uncertainty. And we also clearly know that the state itself and the budget situation is precarious, recognizing that it's a moving target. The thing that I think we're hearing from our membership is, yes, there is concern that sort of revenue delta, whether it's $1 billion to $2.5 billion, depending on sort of what month it is and what projection we're looking at, the concern is that the bulk of that is being looked at as, additional taxes. What can the business community do to meet that delta? And I think to the delegates' point, we know that we have a revenue issue, and we know that that delta is going to have to be made up in some meaningful way, but it's not a zero-sum game. I hope, to the delegates' point, that there will be a bigger conversation happening around reducing spending. It doesn't seem to be the thing that rises to the top of everyone's mind, and maybe it's just because I'm the chamber lobbyist and I get hit with new tax proposals every day and the concerns about them. But I hope that, and I know that the legislature is going to be looking to balance those two things, addressing spending while also looking potentially at revenue raisers in the event that Congress doesn't act and provide us with that support that we need. The thing I'll throw out there, though, is that, we are, the impact to business is real. And I know everyone knows it, but I just saw an article where the comptroller estimated yesterday that 30,000 businesses have closed or will close as a result of the pandemic, and 20,000 more may close permanently moving into the next couple of months. We've seen 9,000 small businesses file for bankruptcy in the last 7 to 8 months. So the impact is real. And in the face of all of this uncertainty, I think from our perspective, the best thing that we can do for our business community is provide them with as much predictability and stability as we can. And that means not making dramatic changes to operational and financial constraints like taxes, tax structures, regulatory requirements. And so in a lot of ways, when we're talking about the budget situation and revenue, certainly grants, incentives, all those things that we like to talk about are important, but recognizing the constraints that we have, maintaining stat and providing businesses with the ability to overcome this crisis and then revisiting what some of those tax or regulatory proposals might look like is what we'll be advocating for. Because again, predictability, stability, it's what our businesses are looking for, it's what their investors are looking for, and that's going to be our number one goal as we move through session. But it's not a zero-sum game. All of this has to happen in a balance, and we're really mindful of that and look forward to just having that discussion and that dialogue and being at the table to try to help achieve that balance.
Great. Thank you so much, Ashley. And Chris, can you tell us what your thoughts are and what you're hearing from businesses?
Well, Ashley says pretty much said it all, but, just to say again, there has been a lot of concern about sales taxes on services. That came up last year. There's a real concern because we have a lot of service providers in Howard County and elsewhere in the state. And we get a real sense that that's breathing down our necks that the General Assembly will have, if not another bill like there was last year where they Delegate Ludicky wanted to tax every service around or come back and try and tax one service after another and go one after another. But that really has a chilling effect, and in many cases, the services, are very mobile, and they can move from one state to the next, and taxes can often discourage economic activity in the state, and discourage the businesses to locate or to stay here, as Ashley has indicated. And so the other thing is that a lot of the programs that are intended to help businesses need to be looked at in terms of flexibility, because some of that's on the federal level, but some of it's also on the state level. And even the federal programs where there's some needs to be some flexibility. I could go into detail, but the state could help, and the Department of Commerce is doing a lot. I want to say I was talking with Karen Glenn Hood about some of the things that the Secretary of Commerce has been doing, and they are trying to get some of these programs and funding out there. But everything we can do to get that information out and get those programs up and running is very helpful. But small businesses sometimes feel that when it comes to getting access to some of this funding, they're the last ones at the trough. That the bigger companies seem to have better access to some of this funding. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. I can't say, but that's the perception, and maybe that is something that that we want to make sure isn't the case, and just dispel that or correct it if it's true. But basically, we all know that restaurants and hotel and hospitality are having about the worst of it, and they are still clamoring for assistance, and if anything we can do to help them would be something that we would want to focus on.
Thank you so much, Chris.
Can I just say something real quick, just on the tax issue, just to be as clear as I possibly can. I've learned over the years never to make absolute promises, particularly when I don't have every piece of information, and information changes on a regular basis. But I will say this, this particular senator has really no interest in looking at the sales tax issue again. And it would be far down the list of things that would have to be considered. So to the degree that people are potentially getting worked up about that, it's something that all I can say is it is not at all in the forefront of my mind.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you all. We appreciate you taking your time to speak with us this morning. Senator Gazon, Delegate Kittleman, Ashley Duffman, and Chris Costello. Thank you so much. And I'll turn it over to Leonardo.
Thank you, Kimberly, and again for doing such a great job. And again, I echo the sentiments to our panelists who were phenomenal in providing their insights and perspectives. And so because it is 10:31 and I'm always respectful of time, I just want to leave you with just a couple of notes. So one that you'll find particularly interesting. So Ashley touched on the fact of the data center legislation that was passed during the previous session. And for those of you that may not have followed it, Howard County has quickly followed and actually adopted, has introduced and passed local legislation for data center credits and so forth. So we're again leading in that effort. And I think on that same note, that's going to further, I think, strengthen the cause for why you'll see us involved with others in terms of really calling for more activity related to 5G as well. All of this continues to work together as we look at advancing technology and opportunity and further closing the digital divide, et cetera. And so just want to touch on that. And then lastly, for those of you that actually, while I know we've enjoyed talking to each other on screen, if you want to grab a cup of coffee and maybe see some people in person, the Chamber will be hosting a coffee tailgate tomorrow. We're going to be at Roganart Bakery. We'll be outside under a tent. Just quickly stop by, pick up a coffee, courtesy of Offutt Kerman and Edwards Performance Solutions. We'll be there from 9:30 to 10:30. And so again, not a lengthy deal. We'll be socially distanced. You can wear your favorite college or sports team, have your mask on. But again, come pick up a coffee, say hello, maybe leave a card or two and so forth. Certainly read your newsletters for more details on upcoming events. I want to again thank BGE for their continued support, as well as our annual partners who are noted behind me as well. And so with that, we'll see you soon and have a great rest of your day.